Hi, as mentioned, I'm Sylvia Cheverie. I'm one of two owners of Chartier restaurant in Beaumont, Alberta. We are here talking about our Kickstarter campaign. Does everybody here a little bit familiar with crowdfunding? I won't go into depth, but essentially we asked people for investment into our company when it was just an idea, and instead of getting equity in the company, they got returns once the business was up and running. So, for example, we were asking for $99,000 to open our French-Canadian brasserie in the heart of Beaumont, Alberta, and in exchange, people got everything from 2 appetizers all the way up to naming rights to our house poutine, which sold in the first 3 days for $5,000. So, Bill asked me to come and speak a little bit about the campaign, and he said, okay, 10 minutes on crowdfunding. And I was like, oh my God, that's like 10 minutes on how to have a baby, because it really was the same thing. I didn't really know where to start. There's just so many angles that you can talk about. So I'm gonna go over kind of briefly to us what worked and what made a successful campaign, and what we think are kind of the do's and don'ts, but certainly open up the conversation afterwards. I'm very accessible and I love talking about crowdfunding. It was a pretty wild ride, so if I missed anything or there's more details, please let me know, because I'm more than happy to. We had made the request to our community for $99,000 to help kickstart the funding of our restaurant. In the end, we did a 60-day campaign on Kickstarter, and we ended up raising just shy of $108,000 between 559 backers. So we are the very first successful restaurant Kickstarter in Alberta and the most successful restaurant Kickstarter in Canada. Wow. So what makes a good Kickstarter campaign? Really, you have to have a good idea. If you are trying to fill a need that doesn't exist, if your idea is maybe half thought through, if it's something that you haven't really walked through until the very end, it's really, really hard to ask people to blindly invest and blindly trust in this idea of yours if there's just really no need. So the idea for Chartier came from when Darren and I we had a first date night. We had a 1-year-old daughter, and so we started driving to Beaumont. That's my hometown, and we live in the country just outside, and we got just about in Beaumont, and I said to Darren, where are we going? Like, there's Boston Pizza, or Basil's Pizza, or Cosmic Pizza. We have a lot of pizza in Beaumont. Like, the pizza to person ratio is out of this world. So we were like, man, we can't be the only parents in Beaumont that are looking for a place to go and have a nice glass of wine, nice appetizer, relaxing atmosphere where there's no TVs. We can't be the only ones. So that's where the idea got started from. Fundamentally, we thought there was a need for this in our community, and we thought, if we're feeling this way, maybe other people are too. So we thought of crowdfunding because, number one, we're a young family. We did own a condo, which we sold in order to invest in the business, but we really did need more capital in order to kind of get this kick-started and off the ground. On top of that, we wanted the opportunity to test the idea, right? Because it's one thing to say, we think this is gonna work, versus, okay, well, there's 559 people who have now donated or pledged $108,000 because they think this is a good idea too. So for us, we thought going to the bank afterwards with this market study that has actual dollars behind it would prove for a really good case study. I was horribly wrong. They still didn't like us for the most part. The only thing harder, I think, to get investment in from a bank than a restaurant is like a spaceship made of bubblegum. Most banks wouldn't even, the 5 C's, they didn't even, the minute we said restaurant, they're like, ooh, I'm sorry, that's not gonna work. So anyway, we thought that this would be a really great kind of opportunity to prove that this was gonna work. The next thing I would suggest for anyone looking to do a crowdfunding campaign is do your research so much. Yes, that's a business plan, making sure that it's a viable idea, because once you have the money donated, you're legally bound to delivering what you promised, right? So if you haven't really thought this through until the end, and halfway through you've received all this money and you have nothing you can't execute, it's a problem, right? We would have had to move from Beaumont, change our names, and start fresh. I actually, after we recorded the video for Kickstarter, I chopped off my hair. I had hair down to here, and I chopped it all off. I'm like, wow, if we're unsuccessful, I just want to blend in. I don't want anybody to know what happened. So yes, research, do your business plan, make sure it's a viable option that's going to work. But when it comes to making the video and actually producing the campaign, we watched every single food Kickstarter campaign on the Kickstarter platform, every one of them. The ones that were super successful and the ones that were so bad. Because we wanted to know, what's the difference, right? Like, what makes people compelled to donate versus be like, oh my gosh, no way, not gonna happen. So after we did all of our research, we kind of landed on one campaign that resonated with us, where we were like, yep, like this feels right. This is what we want to model ourselves after. It was called the Burnt Truffle, and it was a team that had a pre-existing restaurant called the Sticky Walnut in the UK, and their video was hilarious. They swore, they were charming, they were likable. They already had a pre-existing restaurant, which was like, that worried us because, you know, Darren, my husband, worked in food and beverage his whole life. My background's in marketing, but we didn't have a restaurant to say, well, from the team that brought you this, let's do this. We were really just two people that lived in Beaumont that had this idea and had some experience. So when we watched the successful ones, and especially what we liked with the Burnt Truffle, was that it had this really sincere, heartfelt appeal. There was two categories that we saw of videos that did really well. One was like, oh my gosh, this product is so cool and so technological and so awesome, you can't not have it. I would encourage everybody after this, there's a product called the Coolest. It's a cooler that has a blender and a radio and wheels. It does everything. And by the time that you finish watching this, you're like, I guarantee you all of you here will buy a Coolest because it's just that good. So that one didn't really have a heart appeal. That was just a straight kind of product sell, but it was such a damn good product that you couldn't help but want it. The other side of what we saw, what was really successful, is when there was a real heartfelt appeal. It was more than just, we think this business is going to work. It was passion from the owners. It was a greater good message that this isn't just about us. This is about more. This is about a cause. This is about a community. This is about a movement. This is about some sort of philanthropical kind of concept that was beyond, you weren't just donating to make XYZ happen, you were donating and pledging to make the world a better place. So for us, that resonated, right? Because that's really what we wanted to do in our community. We really wanted to enrich life in Beaumont and create a gathering space for our community. So we thought, for sure, this is a great direction that we can go with for our campaign. Be succinct and clear. There was one of the videos we watched was 17 minutes. I don't have 17 minutes and most other people don't. You really have to tell your story clear, succinctly. We're bombarded with videos. How many times a day do you get tagged in something being like, hey, watch this? And it's your dad telling you to watch like a 45-minute TEDx. It's me. So making sure that it was really, really clear, succinct, a very clear storyline.
How succinct?
We did ours, I said, with credits, 6 minutes. I wouldn't probably go over that time frame. Asking people for 6 minutes of their time, it's a pretty big ask. So within that 6 minutes, you have to be engaging. You have to make sense. You have to give them a laugh or make them feel better, right? You're asking people to give you time and money, give them something in return. A feel good, a warm fuzzy. The other thing that we notice in successful campaigns is that you really have to show and tell. So yes, telling your story clearly is great, but you have to show your serious intention by rounding out the wheelhouse. So having your logo, having your name, having a website, having your social media channel set up. We wanted people, when they watched our video, to feel like they've seen Chartier before, that they've been in the restaurant. So we had interior renderings done so they could visualize themselves sitting down at the bar. We wanted them to smell the bread that was baking in the restaurant. So the more imagery and the more thought and energy we put into the video, we thought would yield us a bigger result. What not to do? Opposite of everything I said, really. The ones that weren't successful, they were really long, really repetitive, they were bad ideas. Like there was a Viking bar where you would have to dress like a Viking in order to come in. I don't know, like it's pretty specific. Likability, there just was no likability. There was no ability to relate and connect. Number 3, communication. That one was, it was a lot of communicating. Darren and I would each spend about 40 hours a week communicating online. It's not like that Bronco food dehydrator where you set it and forget it and walk away. It's like a full-time job. A lot of it was around explaining what crowdfunding is, because despite the fact that crowdfunding's been around for years, and globally, like billion-dollar industry, billions of dollars are allocated to new projects. But within Canada, and then narrow it down to Alberta, and then narrow it down to Edmonton, and then boop, Beaumont, like nobody knew what it was. So we were on Beaumont Facebook chat groups constantly explaining the premise of crowdfunding, answering questions. People thought it was a charity. People thought we were going to take their money and move to Mexico. People, it was just a lot of confusion. So we were very active in explaining what it was and giving credibility to the process. Now, since we have been successful, there's been a lot of other very successful campaigns. So the more that happens, I think the more comfortable people will start to be. Creative engagement. So you launch your campaign and you're like, please support me. 60 days of saying, please support me gets really boring, and you feel like you're just begging for money constantly, which you are, totally. You're shameless, you'll do anything. But we wanted to make sure that we had an active voice online, so we were constantly trying to find new creative ways of engaging with our audience. So every time that somebody pledged us, we would thank them in a really funny way. So this was one of the ways that we did it, where we took ketchup and we spelt their names out in ketchup and then wrote thank you in fries. We decorated Easter eggs with their name on it and took pictures. We sang songs. You can go onto our Chartier YouTube channel and laugh, because it's really funny. We were like up until midnight making these thank you videos just to create some new, exciting, engaging content, so we weren't just constantly asking people for money. And then press. We were really lucky. We did get a lot of press coverage. We were pretty strategic in how we reached out, though. About a month before we launched our idea to crowdfund a restaurant, somebody beat us to it and launched an idea to do a kickstarter, I think it was Indiegogo, for a restaurant in Edmonton. So we thought we would go to the press and be like, oh, nobody does restaurants and crowdfunding, it's really, really cool. And they beat us to the punch, and they were on every single radio station and TV station. And we're like, okay, well, we're no longer a news story. Just having a crowdfunding campaign was no longer a news story. So instead of kind of jumping the gun and reaching out, we waited. And we said, once we get some traction, once we start to see some success, that's when we'll actually go to the media. Because unfortunately for the other restaurant, they weren't successful. They only reached about 10% of their total goal. So we said, okay, now the only way that the press will really care is if we start to show that we might be successful. So in the first week, we got to about 30% of our total goal. So at the 10-day mark, we crafted news releases and started our distribution and started to get some interest from news channels and radio channels. And I had to brush up on my French that I hadn't used since high school in order to do interviews on CBC Radio Canada. It was terrifying, but we said yes to everything, every speaking engagement, nerd night, every request for an interview. We jumped at it at the drop of a hat just in order to promote our message and get our name out there. So we were really, really flexible with it.